I've been having some hard traveling, I thought you knowed. I've been having some hard traveling way down the road. I've been having some hard traveling, hard rambling, hard gambling. I've been having some hard traveling, Lord.
Hi, my name is Wanda Guthrie, and I'm with the Thomas Merton Center Environmental Justice Committee. And I'm here with a couple of really wonderful people who've been working hard on their piece of the environment. What we know now is that community by community, what we would have to just call Frankenstein has invaded our lives. In western Pennsylvania, and in all of Pennsylvania and in New York, we have all these problems with fracking. In Wisconsin and other places close by in Minnesota, they are having problems with sand mining for fracking. This is a monster that seems to go east, west, south, north, to a community near you, and it pillages villages. So I'd like to introduce to you Melissa Troutman and Joshua Probanik, who are co-producers of Triple Divide, and they can tell you about this movie and more about themselves. And Linda Meadowcroft, who is from Wisconsin and has been working on with many hats, but she's been working on the frack sand in Wisconsin and can tell you about this. And with us also today is Edie Ellert, and she is from Wisconsin and has been working with Crawford Stewardship Project, and she's here with us by phone. Hi, Edie.
Hi, thank you.
Okay, Melissa, can you and Josh tell us a little bit about what you found about this Frankenstein in Pennsylvania that has been taking water and people's health and so on?
Sure. So our documentary is called Triple Divide, and it's an 18-month investigation into how the impacts from fracking are being handled. And we just finished it. It's just out now, and I will let Josh talk a little bit more about it, and then I'd like to say a few things about Mountain Watershed Association too. But first,
my name is Joshua Probanik. I'm the director of Triple Divide and also the editor-in-chief for publicherald.org. We are an investigative news nonprofit that works on behalf of the public interest. With Triple Divide, we investigated how the state is handling the impacts of hydraulic fracturing in Pennsylvania. And what we found was that companies, the natural gas industry, and the state of Pennsylvania are actually working to change the water quality history of Pennsylvania. They're doing this by dismissing pre-drill tests, saying that there's pre-existing problems for areas where water was once considered clean, erasing the liability and accountability of the natural gas company on behalf of water contamination. So Triple Divide is a cradle-to-grave journey about what happens with hydraulic fracturing from mostly the residential perspective, and also a little bit from the industry perspective, since we interviewed Chesapeake Energy, the Marcellus Shale Coalition, and a few others in the film.
Wow, you must have a lot of stories from people. Is it filled with stories about what's happened in their communities?
It is. It's rich in stories that came from people who were impacted by the industry. Mm-hmm. We're most concerned with those impacts and how our Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania handled that with those people. So we have a lot of stories about DEP and individuals in the state.
Oh, yeah. DEP has been pretty remiss in a lot of ways. Can you tell us a little bit more about the stories? Maybe one story about a person who had to work with the DEP and give us a little flavor of the film.
One story in the film is a woman named Judy. Judy just retired to her home in Potter County, Pennsylvania, which is a beautiful place next to the headwaters of the Allegheny River, which flow through Pittsburgh. And Judy had a well drilled on her neighbor's property, 450 feet away from her house. And she started to notice issues with her well water about 2 years into the drilling process. So she contacted DEP and expected them to come and investigate the case and help her out. But what she ended up finding was that DEP worked a lot with the industry to remove the liability of the industry from the issues at hand. So often when Judy had issues in regards to trying to replace her water in long term, DEP was giving the industry excuses to not be liable for the water contamination. So DEP, for instance, told Judy that her water, even though it was contaminated, couldn't be held accountable with the natural gas industry because they were outside of the 6-month window, because she made her complaint outside of 6 months. So that means that's one of the loopholes in our Oil and Gas Act. If you make that complaint outside of the 6 month of drilling, then the industry doesn't have to be held liable for water contamination. Also, DEP did not tell Judy about a drilling waste pit that was buried on that property into the seasonal high water table, which could very likely leak into her water supply. She didn't find that out until we did the file reviews at the DEP's office in 2012 and talked to Judy.
Act 13 is Pennsylvania's new oil and gas legislation, and it has increased that 6-month window between the end of drilling or fracking and when you notice your water quality change. That is now 12 months instead of 6 months. But still, it's a really big concern. You know, that's not the only story that we investigated where the people were told that it was a pre-existing condition and the oil and gas industry was not held liable. So then it falls upon the individual homeowner to hire a lawyer and do the things that our state regulators are supposed to do. When water supply is impacted, according to Pennsylvania state regulations, that water supply is supposed to be restored. So folks are hiring a lawyer if they can afford it, and the ones that can't are just stuck with bad water. So it's a really
So Melissa, would you recommend that homeowners in areas proposed to be mined test their water now before mining begins and keep a regular check on it?
Absolutely.
And be very, very quick about how they respond to the DEP when they find that they have contaminants in their water?
Yes, I currently, in addition to working with Josh on Public Herald and creating Triple Divide and sharing that with the world, I also am outreach coordinator for Mountain Watershed Association, which is a nonprofit organization that began around a kitchen table in the mid or early 90s to respond to water loss and land subsidence, property damage issues from coal mining. Well, now, of course, the Marcellus is in on top of it. And when extraction industries like mining or fracking are coming in, Mountain Watershed has a list of DEP or state-certified water testing labs that we offer, that we hand over to folks, and we always encourage folks to get their water quality checked as often as they can. Now, some of these tests, especially if you're going to be living near drilling and fracking, these tests are very expensive in order to cover all of the parameters. So they're called Tier 3 tests, and they can cost about $1,000. So, and what we found in Triple Divide is that these one-time snapshot pre-drill tests are vulnerable to being are vulnerable to being dismissed because they are just a one-time snapshot. So we encourage folks to get their water tested as often as they can afford to. But also, there are some other great resources in Southwest Pennsylvania in particular. Mountain Watershed is only one. We do water quality monitoring trainings and train people to monitor surface waters. But the free equipment that comes with it, you can also use to test your tap water on a daily basis. Now, this isn't going to tell you precisely what's in your tap water, but it'll let you kind of see where your water's at in terms of total dissolved solids and conductivity. And if you see a spike, then you might want to spend the extra money to get your tested. That is free if you come to one of Mountain Watershed Association's trainings that we do in conjunction with Dickinson College. Now, Southwest Environmental Health Project also has water monitoring kits that they will give people for free.
Well, I hope this information gets out to the public. I know many people will not be able to afford the $1,000 for the high-level testing. I suppose then their only option really is to truck in their water or bring it in by the case in bottles. And, we're truly having to pay for water at this point in our evolution as human beings on the planet. And that's going to be a big change for people. I hope we can roll it back so we don't have to do that.
I could say that if you do not have the funds to test your water, and if you have a natural gas well that's coming onto your property, you signed a lease, the gas company will likely come to you and tell you that they will test the water themselves. That will remove the burden of the cost on the homeowner. Although what we ended up finding was that because there's no pre-drill testing criteria or law in the state for natural gas companies, oftentimes these pre-drill tests are missing specific chemicals that might be associated with natural gas drilling. And that's really important that the homeowner knows what these chemicals are and that they're asking the natural gas company to test for those. For instance, the BTEX compounds that could come back from natural gas drilling, something like benzene, toluene, xylene. You should ask the natural gas company if their pre-drill test is going to include those chemicals, and if it's not, then you should mandate or work something in your contract where it does.
Could I read from the Pennsylvania Alliance for Clean Water and Air some of the reports from people in localities that are being frack mined in Pennsylvania? They're positively horrifying. Let's see. Someone in Carmichael's, PA, there is a gas compressor station 780 feet away. Her exposure has been through the air. She is getting headaches, fatigue, dizziness, nosebleeds. Her blood tests show exposure to benzene and other chemicals. I'll jump down so you can see the effect it's having on animals and people on farms in the area. Let's see if I can find that here. Yes, out in the Upper Mon, Washington County, PA. Exposure was through water to glycol and arsenic. The symptoms of this individual's son was stomach, liver and kidney involvement, pain, nausea, fatigue, mouth ulcers. His daughter has similar symptoms. In their pets, they have seen dogs dying, goats dying, horses getting sick, and perhaps now dead. Let's see, one more, and we'll move on. Maybe we could hear from Edie about health effects that Jim Tittle might have brought up in his film, The Price of Sand. Oh, goodness. In Bedford County, Columbia Gas Storage Field is on site. Her exposure also has been through the air, but she now has detectable methane in her blood tests. She's having headaches, breathing difficulties, achy muscles, myriad health issues. One more, just because it's so incredible. Various, in Bedford County also, various health ailments. 5 cows have died, 3 dogs, 12 chickens, 4 cats. The DEP may or may not come back saying something else caused it, but the fact is, nothing like that had ever happened on these farms before.
Yeah. Edie, are you still with us? Evie?
Yes.
Oh, how good. Would you like to talk a little bit about this?
Yes. What I'm hearing so parallels what goes on in the frack sand mining industry here. Right now we have frack sand being loaded in a residential neighborhood in the town of Prairie du Chien, And this is in Crawford County, Wisconsin. So we're in the hills of Crawford County over here. And what we're doing is seeing sand mining in all of Wisconsin, something like 125 mine sites. So like in Prairie du Chien, we have loading of sand mining in a residential neighborhood. Neighbors complaining about this dust showing up in their homes, this very fine dust. It gets in their filters. They can't have their windows open. And the company is telling them that, oh, this is steam. This is just because the sand is wet, and so then there's steam that comes up. And they keep saying that. And if you keep saying it enough, people start to believe it. The county health department isn't doing anything. And in the state of Wisconsin, we do not have crystalline silica standards. It was decided that wasn't needed. We're supposed to believe that the industry idea that it is safe until proven it is not. And it somehow is resting on the part of citizens across the country to prove that they are having problems versus the industry being required to prove that they will do no harm.
Absolutely. Absolutely, this is what we're seeing. Every story that we hear about this is that we have to prove that there's harm, that they don't have to prove this to us, cradle to grave, that this is okay to do. In your case, silica sand and silicosis is a huge problem. Are there regulations on this as well?
Well, what there is there is some monitoring of air, but it's very limited. And what is happening is the assumption is that if there's a distance, it's not a problem. So there's a lot of assumption. And there have been citizen groups who have done some air monitoring around large sites and have suggested there's an issue, but the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, has not followed up and said, yes, indeed, we should do more thorough study. They may be looking into this now, but things move very slowly. And meanwhile, more and more sand mines get their permits. Mm-hmm. We're highly concerned that neighbors of sand mines and sand mine processing plants, those along truck routes, are all having issues with this additional fugitive dust. But because no one is exactly carefully monitoring, and no one is monitoring for the tiniest particles, silicosis is caused by these very tiny, sharp particles that are too small to see. And we're not monitoring them here. And some other states do have those kinds of monitoring and those kind of level requirements, such as California and Texas. But here, where we have more frac sand mining than anywhere, we do not check for particles of that size.
Could I just mention that yesterday we had another program in another location, and a person called in, an individual who had worked for 4 months, only 4 months, in one of the frac sand containers at a gas drilling site in Pennsylvania. He has now been so impaired with asthma that we could hear him breathing for the duration of his online call. It really breaks your heart when you see someone who's able-bodied, wants to work, willing to work. OSHA has offered no protection. He was not required. It was never mentioned that he should wear a respiration device of any kind. And it happened to him in 4 months. So what's happening in Prairie du Chien with the workers there? Have you seen them wearing masks?
No, the workers at the loading site, at the railroad loading site in Prairie du Chien, do not wear masks. And we're concerned about that as well. And it again begs the issue of why do we not have more monitoring? Pattison Sand Company of Clayton, Iowa is the company around us, but there are numbers of companies throughout Wisconsin that are doing sand mining and processing. And we're concerned that the Department of Natural Resources is now a political organization. It's not independent. And Wisconsin is open to business. We are putting forward business ahead of communities. And while jobs are needed, there aren't that many jobs from frac sand mining, and instead we're seeing a diminished resources, diminished tourism, a diminish in available agricultural land because of all these open pit sand minings. So we think that there are so many issues with air and water that are not being addressed. And what we would like to see is a step back and have there be data collected and monitoring done, and then decide if it is safe to move forward. Another issue in our state is that high-capacity wells are used for cleaning the sand. In our state, you can get a high-capacity well approved very, very easily. No one is looking at what's the accumulative effect of numbers and numbers of high-cap wells in a given area. Each well is decided on its own.
Could I just add one more thing in this part of the discussion? I'd like everyone to understand that Wisconsin, not too long ago, had some of the most robust environmental protections in the nation. It's a pristine state where agriculture is extremely important, so the land was always stewarded very, very carefully, both by farmers and by conservationists. What has happened over the past few elections is that individuals who have another viewpoint of how things should operate in the state have taken over, stripped the laws, stripped the DNR's power to be an independent permitting process, and it has happened so quickly. It's been stunning.
Right. There's a movement afoot in Pennsylvania by a lot of activists, fractivists, and they are demanding a few things: that we appoint an environmental expert for the as Secretary of the DEP, who is not from the industry, because this is what's changed it for us. We have a very poor DEP, and that we have a moratorium on permits, and that we also say, you can't have any toxic secrets from us. So we also demand that we have justice for those who have been harmed, for the people that are in the Triple Divide film, and that most important, I think, right now is to reopen the DEP Office of Energy and Technology Deployment so that we can have solar and wind power and renewable energy. Now, in Wisconsin, is there a movement for renewable energy as well?
There is, and it's been very heartening to see areas of wind farms developing throughout the countryside, on farms, on ridges. Wisconsin is flat, it's not flat, I shouldn't say that. Compared to Pennsylvania, it's flat.
Yeah.
But it has beautiful rolling hills and ridges, and it differs depending on which part of the state you're in. And there are wind farms, but my understanding is that those kinds of sustainable energies aren't being sponsored any longer. In fact, there have been cutbacks, and my understanding presently that the state of Wisconsin has cut back pretty much all of that. What have you seen, Edie? What have you heard about that issue?
We agree that the other side of this issue of trying to stop frac sand mining is to promote sustainable activities, from tourism to more diverse agriculture and such. In additional regional energy production is something that's being promoted heavily here. And one of the reasons is we have huge power lines being promoted to go through our state to bring power from wind farms and fracking and whatever from out east, from out west, all the way across our state to go to urban areas. And yet we're not seeing that economically and in terms of energy needs, that this is justified. And this gets to the issue of who is making profits in all of this. It is the big companies and their investors who are making the profits on this. And we need to start looking at energy production as an issue of society, as an issue of putting together what society needs and coming up with the most sustainable approaches to energy production based on need, not based on profits for large companies and investors.
I think that I think it's really important to look at this whole picture, and speaking to what you're saying, Edie, it's important that the consumer really recognize their responsibility in knowing where their energy comes from, who maybe or who or where cultural heritage sites or individuals' private water supplies, what's being sacrificed in order to get energy to your home.
Rather, it's not flat. I shouldn't say that. Compared to Pennsylvania, it's flat. But it has beautiful rolling hills and ridges, and it differs depending on which part of the state you're in. And there are wind farms, but my understanding is that those kinds of sustainable energies aren't being sponsored any longer. In fact, there have been cutbacks, and my understanding presently that the state of Wisconsin has cut back pretty much all of that. What have you seen, Edie? What have you heard about that issue?
We agree that the other side of this issue of trying to stop frac sand mining is to promote sustainable activities, from tourism to more diverse agriculture and such. In additional regional energy production is something that's being promoted heavily here. And one of the reasons is we have huge power lines being promoted to go through our state to bring power from wind farms and fracking and whatever from out east, from out west, all the way across our state to go to urban areas. And yet we're not seeing that economically and in terms of energy needs, that this is justified. And this gets to the issue of who is making profits in all of this. It is the big companies and their investors who are making the profits on this. And we need to start looking at energy production as an issue of society, as an issue of putting together what society needs and coming up with the most sustainable approaches to energy production based on need, not based on profits for large companies and investors.
I think that I think it's really important to look at this whole picture, and speaking to what you're saying, Edie, it's important that the consumer really recognize their responsibility in knowing where their energy comes from, who maybe or who or where cultural heritage sites or individuals' private water supplies, what's being sacrificed in order to get energy to your home. I think that the FRACKENSTEIN, as Wanda put it, is actually, if we had to pick one positive out of it, it would be that there is a real educational opportunity to help consumers, the public, connect the dots between their basic needs, energy, food, water security, and where those things come from. And also, always looking at, is there a better way that we can be getting these things to ourselves? And
certainly there must be a better way. In Wisconsin, the areas to be proposed include the entire western third of Wisconsin, plus there are some significant rivers that feed into the Mississippi, and sand mining would also occur in those areas. One of those areas is the lower Wisconsin Riverway, and I hope everyone can one day, before it's destroyed, come and see the lower Wisconsin Riverway, and you will know what peace truly means. It's the lower branch of the Wisconsin River is 92 miles long. It runs through the southwest quadrant of the state. It's bounded by lovely forests, agricultural fields, and then it gets to an area within 45 miles of its confluence with the Mississippi. It enters an area called the Driftless area. This is an ancient unglaciated area, the largest unglaciated inland area in the world. That I'm referring to the last ice age, which was about 8,000 years ago. And so the geology has existed for that long, disturbed only by agriculture. You paddle through that part of the river and you see spires of sandstone that go up into the sky, maybe 100 feet or so. On top of many of these bluffs and spires are ancient Indian sacred sites. Now, when we think of Indians in Pennsylvania, unfortunately, the Native American population here has a very low profile. Every effort was made over the past 200 years to excuse the language, but remove Native American presence from Pennsylvania. There is no delicate way to say this. Yeah. The last band that lived in Pennsylvania was the Corn Planter Reservation up near the headwaters of the Allegheny River. I have done some research and found that there were 6 different locations that the Kinzua Dam could have been built and have approximately the same return in power, electrical power. However, it was chosen to be built so that it flooded out the Corn Planter Reservation, and those native peoples moved up into New York State and to the reserves up there. In Wisconsin, this lower Wisconsin Riverway corridor that I was talking about has hundreds of ancient effigy mounds. These are heaped earth monuments, and Wisconsin effigies are unique in all the world because the effigies are made in the shapes of animals, birds, reptiles, spirits, and headdress-wearing human beings. These antiquities date back 1,300 years. They're part of our American story. And they're very much part of an American story that has not yet been told because the information on them is virtually non-existent. There are some archaeologists and some surveyors who have surveyed them through the years, but that's all. And yet this is a very important part of Indian mound building across the United States in ancient times. And even more than that, these effigy mounds are the churches, the worship places of Native Americans who still live in the state of Wisconsin. I live in a small town north of Madison, and there are dozens of people in our neighborhood who are Ho-Chunk. The past president of the Ho-Chunk Nation, that is the Winnebago Indians, lives right around the corner from me. These are places that they still have stories about. They still tell the stories of these places. Their elders never saw the stories because of all the removals and so on. But recently precisely in the middle of the lower Wisconsin Riverway, there was recovery of a site. And I was told by individuals, both native and non-native, who worked on that effort to get that particular land sold back to the Ho-Chunk, that it was one of their most important places, and they still had stories. And when the elders came to visit, they recognized it from the stories their elders had told them generations ago. So it's one of the most stunning places that you could visit in the United States. Wisconsin isn't just about cows and corn and beer and cheese. It's about history, and it's about the environment. And that's our family values in Wisconsin, and that's Native American values.
Yes.
You want to have that close relationship with the land where you truly respect it.
You know, it seems to me, listening to Linda and listening to a lot of things we've heard from Josh and from Melissa, that we can connect the dots, our past, our present, and what we want for the future. So, Melissa, can you tell us a little bit more about what you think and what you've learned about connecting the dots?
Well, as far as protecting what we have now and moving ahead into the future in a sane way, I think in order to do that successfully, we have to know where we've come from. You know, Edie, I'm sorry, Linda, you've done such great work, studying the history and culture of Native American peoples and helping to preserve that culture for the ones that are living in our society now. And it's heartbreaking to think that rich, 1,000-year plus history can be wiped out in an instant in terms of, the overall scope of time we're talking about here. And in dealing with protecting ourselves and ensuring that we have a sustainable future, we also need to connect the dots from Wyoming and Montana, where Halliburton got its start, to the 2005 Energy Policy Act, where major exemptions were put in for this industry, exemptions from our strongest environmental regulations, to the frac sand mining in Wisconsin and Minnesota, which allows for fracking in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Texas and all the other shale fields of the United States and the world. We have to be able to see the big picture historically and currently. Films like Triple Divide, investigative journalism really helps with that. Community groups like Crawford Stewardship Project and Thomas Merton Center help to do that. I think the biggest challenge is, for me personally, that I've seen in my experience, is getting people to care. We live in a culture where we are so consumed by our daily lives. We have so much to think about, and we live in such a saturated culture. There's so much to maybe potentially pay attention to at once that it's hard to get people to really care about what's happening to other people or what might happen in the future. So I think that, I don't know, Wanda, do you want to talk a little bit about how we might kind of build this movement and connect the dots across the country and the world? I'm not really sure the best way to do that myself, but it's a big job.
Well, I think probably the main thing to remember is there was a time when we had a lot more rights than we do now. I was appalled when I went to my city council meeting and they said, we can't do anything about it. We will be sued. There's corporate personhood. The industry said, we will sue you if you don't allow us to come and get this. And this is appalling. The legislation has been appalling. And so to be able to come together and speak with each other is really important. And the more we speak with one another, the more that we recognize that all of our needs are right here in the people we know and care about in our communities as well. So I think the most wonderful thing just happened, is that the equivalent of saying, you don't have to live with this Frankenstein because it's not a person. This is not a person. Corporations are not persons. The Judge O'Donnell Seneca just recently in Pennsylvania outlined it very, very well. And she outlined it going back to 1776 in our Constitution at a time when we were guarding carefully what rights we had in communities. She said that the corporations have no spiritual nature, no feelings, intellect, beliefs, thoughts, emotions, or sensations, because they do not exist in the manner that humankind exists. They can't be let alone by government, because businesses are grapes ripe upon the vine of the law, and the people of the Commonwealth raise, tend, and prune at their pleasure and need. So that's who we really are. So rediscovering that we can do this, and we do have the right to clean air, pure water, and safety from a toxic environment, is who we are. And so that's what I think is important to rediscover.
I'd like to jump in here and encourage everyone to keep your legislators' phone numbers handy, whether it's in your cell phone, on your desk by your landline, and so forth. and call them. Make a commitment to call once a week about one talking point. Find a little bit about it, narrow it down to one short statement, call your representative, and say that this is what you believe. This is how the scenario should go. This is what we want. If they give you a hard time, and this apparently voter intimidation from staff of legislators' offices is much more common now than it has been in the past, don't be intimidated. Simply, very calmly, repeat your statement and tell the staff of the representative that it's their duty, it's their job to communicate your comments to the senator, the legislator. It doesn't pay to get into arguments with them. Simply make those short, very clear statements, thank them, and then you can hang up. If you wish to debate them, be well prepared.
Right. and I think it's important. It's important in elections to find good candidates. But more important than that is just to remember who's the boss here. It's the people. You know, it's not a pyramid from the top down. It's us on the top going down and saying, you work for us. You know, we have a common good, and that's what you should be working toward. And also, get in touch with the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. It's CELDF.org. And ask them what you can do in your community and in your county. In fact, maybe we need to just change the Constitution of Pennsylvania. We have a right to do that. We have a right to meet and to just take this into our own hands. We used to have a group of censors in 1776. Their job was to meet and figure out whether the government was doing what the Constitution said it should be doing. But now we have industry and bad legislation. So remember that. Talk to your neighbors about that. You know, get in touch with CELDF. Get in touch with groups that are doing water and air monitoring. You know, they're on this front line. And even on this front line, they are going to have to fight the DEP because, you know, what they're doing may not do well in court. But the sooner we recognize that we need to take back this power ourselves, the better.
I think, you know, if it wasn't fracking, it would be something else, right? It's been, you know, like I said earlier, Mountain Watershed got its start responding to coal issues, and Appalachia's been extracted for a really long time, and fracking is just the new extraction. And you know, we have a lot of great water in Pennsylvania, like you guys do in Wisconsin, and you know, half the country is currently still in drought left over from last year. So water maybe is a future resource that could be extracted from our communities. So I think it's very important, like Wanda said, to you know, really try to take back our responsibility
Yes.
and our rights in order to protect ourselves from whatever may come in. In Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, the reality of the Frackenstein, as you guys have coined it, is that people are being harmed right now, and our legislators need to be held accountable right now. And this film that Josh and I made, we kept that in mind throughout the entire production process, and because we wanted to create something that people could use to hold their leaders accountable, to be the good research that they can use in the debate with their leaders who keep saying that these problems aren't happening or that they're not happening enough to actually do something about. So,
I could say in regards to the corporations being people, you know, corporations have been people for well over 100 years now in this country, but many of the times we don't get to see the outcomes of what those people create. One of those outcomes are negative outcomes. Those are called externalities in our economy. And Triple Divide is a film that shows you what these externalities are, that shows you what the corporate personhood can do to your community, can do to your lifestyle, and can do to your rights with their rights with our Constitution, using our rights in our Constitution against the public interest. Something like this frack sand movie, connecting it back to Pennsylvania, you can see where frack sand on a well pad can blow clearly onto a resident's property who is just an innocent bystander next to a natural gas well. And witnessing that on camera is that much more powerful than trying to figure out what that's like for that person. Being able to actually see it and see that person having a hard time breathing in the dust that's blowing constantly from a well pad onto their home is such a serious thing. And to find that connected, all the way into Wisconsin, and then finding that connected all the way back into how we've designed our economy to allow for corporations to act this way is a really serious issue, and something that, of course, we need to address.
In Wisconsin, we have a coalition of several nonprofit organizations that are working to preserve the lower Wisconsin Riverway and to roll back frack sand mining. I would encourage everyone to become an investigative reporter. After work, you can take your camera. You can perhaps get within range, perhaps with a telephoto lens, of a gas drilling operation. We've learned many interesting things in Wisconsin from doing this. We have learned that indeed there has been fracked sand on railroad cars that has left big sand drifts on the tracks and is slipping into both the Mississippi. I don't know if we've caught it slipping into the Wisconsin River yet. And ultimately this is going to help. The DNR in Wisconsin is now stripped down. The present administration thought they were being very beneficent in actually creating 2 more DNR positions. I believe one of them is even half-time, though, and you would need many more than that. The DNR has stated that they simply can't do the work. So your Department of Natural Resources, whatever state you live in, is depending on you to make the reports, to gather the evidence photographically.
Could I make a comment in here?
Yes, please.
I just wanted to mention that I appreciate the conversation on the responsibility of citizens to be taking back our power here in our local communities, in our state communities, and beyond. One of the things I want to speak to too is the opportunity here. It takes things sometimes becoming pretty difficult and pretty bad for people to step away from their own very busy and full lives to look around and see in their community how important it is to become more active again. And I'm seeing that there is this opportunity. People are coming forward. They're getting to know their neighbors again. They're getting to know community. People who don't necessarily agree on a lot of issues are learning how to work together, are coming together for the commonality of the strengths of their communities, of wanting to see their communities be sustainable and wonderful places to live for coming generations. We look at the kids and we think, my goodness, what kind of world are we going to leave for them? And so while these things are all so difficult and we struggle with them, there is also that real opportunity, and I see it happening, of people being able to learn how to work with one another again and recognize that it's larger than our own little household. We are part of the community.
I'd like to, maybe we could orient our conversation for a few more minutes towards the effects that frack sand and frack gas drilling is having on people and on the earth. I was totally blown away, to use an old euphemism, by the fact that we're now having earthquakes created by injection drilling and by frack gas drilling. Has anyone heard of those incidents, and can you share those with us?
Well, Josh is from Ohio, so he could probably speak about that.
So yes, in Youngstown, Ohio, they have injection wells set up that can take waste that's generated from hydraulic fracturing. Those are called Class 2 injection wells. And we describe what they are in the film. They're just basically ways that we've been able to deal with our waste problems. It's what some people consider just dumping poisons into the ground and hoping that they go away. And that's essentially what they are. And when they do that, there's a chance that they can do that next to a fault line. And because there's these new types of chemicals in these hydraulic fracturing fluids, there's new lubricants, it makes it more possible for those fluids to migrate into a fault line like that and then possibly lubricate that and allow it to slip. So there's the potential for these earthquakes to happen in places where the geology is susceptible to it. And unfortunately, we've seen that. Now, the industry has fought back recently with a study to say that the intensity of an earthquake that would happen in relation to that would not be significant enough to cause any serious harm. But I think that's a very speculative statement. I don't think that they would know that for sure.
And again, is that a cumulative, is that a statement made thinking of all of the surrounding wells that are going to be there eventually and all those additional, potential cracks that have been created from the pressure? Like the air and water thing in general, it's just, we're not looking, the state and the industry, they're not regulating, and they just aren't doing it cumulatively.
Yeah, and in addition to the earthquakes, the idea of using injection wells to store waste underground has something that's been faulty since the 80s. In the 80s, there was a briefing that was sent to Congress that was accumulation of a study done with the EPA about the injection wells in the country and how safe those injection wells were. And what they found that in most cases, these injection wells were able to migrate to an aquifer, that the poisons did not stay deep underground because of shoddiness in the grouting that was done on the well. Most of the grout will fail over time when you drill a well like this. And then, of course, there's the very likely possibility that an injection well will be located next to an abandoned well, a well that was drilled for oil some years back. And if it is located next to an abandoned or orphaned wells or lost wells in the state of Pennsylvania or in Ohio, it is extremely likely that those fluids will be able to find a pathway to that abandoned well and migrate up towards an aquifer. And there were documented cases of that in this report in the 80s. Several dozens of cases where this had happened, where homeowners had complained about it. So the more that we set up injection wells in the state of Pennsylvania, the more that we would have to first plug all of these orphaned and abandoned wells, which they're trying to do, but they would have to also fix the grouting problem, where grouting is failing too often on either injection wells or Marcellus wells themselves. I mean, Marcellus wells, if you talk about grout, we show in the film how, we have failure rates all over the state for well construction, at 7% right now for the initial production of Marcellus.
That's the immediate failures.
Immediate failures, yeah. So, and if you look at the cement squeezes across the state of Pennsylvania, that is when grouting has failed and they need to go down, perforate a well casing, squeeze cement in to prevent those fluids from migrating towards the surface. There's a lot of cement squeezes in the state of Pennsylvania, too many of concern to say that we should just continue with this without figuring out the grouting issue.
Yeah, our whole culture of regulation seems to be permit it first and then check for Indian burial grounds or abandoned wells or, how to treat the radioactive waste that comes up from shale. Figure all that out later. Mm-hmm. It doesn't align itself to the precautionary principle. And it allows, it's negligent in the way that it creates all of this risk without really understanding the risk, and creates the impacts that we all are familiar with from cradle to grave. So,
yeah, we found that when you talk to your councils about this and talk about acceptable risk, all they can say is, well, the industry thinks that's an acceptable risk, and never are we informed about what we might think is an acceptable risk. Oh, only 7%. Oh, acceptable risk? I don't think so. Not for us.
Yes, acceptable risks is another gray area for this industry, and it's a very scary area. there's really no safe pressure for an injection well when you pump those fluids down into a formation. It's not really safe to pump them at any pressure at all, because you may disrupt the integrity of those formations, and that could, of course, connect to a fault line, cause an earthquake like it did in so many places across the country, in Ohio and Arkansas and others. And the idea that we have, up to 7,000 Marcellus wells in the state of Pennsylvania that were all fracked at 15,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, or around 10,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, that's an opportunity for that many more issues to arise. If we're not going to allow, X amount of pressure for an injection well, then why are we allowing so much pressure for what's essentially the exact same thing as an injection well, a Marcellus well?
We have an attorney who used to work for the Department of Environmental Protection under Governor Thornburgh here in Pennsylvania, Bob Gang, who is a wonderful environmental attorney, who says in the film, what he kind of poses the question, what is the, again, cumulative net effect of all this fracking of this shale, of all the pumping down of this stuff that's staying down there? And again, that's not something that seems to be completely understood, and yet we continue to permit it without knowing what might happen.
Yes, I recently heard from an individual that the damage to the Washington Monument 2 years ago was caused by drilling in Virginia. And if that doesn't wake the American public up, well,
I didn't even know that happened.
it's it was an assault on our national monuments, for heaven's sakes. And surely we have to wake up to that kind of thing. I might add, too, that the Native American associates I have, friends, circles, and so on, they think that this kind of manufacturing is going to be the final assault on Mother Earth, because Gaia has to now fight in her own defense. We're having climate change, which is obvious if you know how to read scientific articles, and I have thousands over the past 10 years. In fact, last year I read 2 studies that were studies of all the studies on climate change that have been performed, and it was found in both of these review studies, the scholarship was found to be bona fide, accurate science.
Yeah.
And by way of saying that, we're having climate change. The crust of the earth, the mantle, the Great Mother's mantle, is also becoming more active and will be affected by climate change as the bodies of water, the oceans, the rivers, and so forth experience changes related to climate change. And that will disrupt these toxic waste dumps we've put 500, 200 feet down, all the more.
Absolutely. It's one of the biggest cumulative externalities of the economy as far as oil and gas goes, is the possibility of very serious problems with climate change. And, our ignorance of that is unfortunate, and I wish we knew more about it. There's a documentary called The Island President, where you can see the Maldives being swept under the ocean at this moment because we can't come to agreement about how much carbon we want to emit into the atmosphere. So understanding these externalities with movies like The Price of Sand, understanding them through movies like Triple Divide, is really important when you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life for the next 20 to 30 years, how you want to make those decisions, whether or not you want the United States to become an oil-covered banana republic so that we depend strictly on one fossil fuel resource and that our economy is so dependent on it that we can't make any other decision, positive decision, without first checking in with the oil and gas industry.
Or we've spent all our money laying the one infrastructure and don't have enough to lay the next.
I don't say these things as to be some type of scaremonger. That's exactly what we've turned into. We used to look at, the South America as this place of the banana republic that was so dependent upon one resource. But here we are in the 21st century where we're supposed to be in a wave of new technology, and we're depending upon 150-year-old technology to boost up our economy and to keep us, thriving. And that's a very scary and weak country, in my opinion. I think we're much stronger than that.
Yeah, Josh, a few examples. China stole the solar panel industry right out from under us over the past 10 years. Germany has employed hundreds of thousands of individuals, keeping their economy more robust than others in Europe by implementing solar panels at the individual level, that is on home rooftops and so on, and also permitting people to, if they can be energy saving with their solar panels, they actually feed some energy back into the grid. This isn't science fiction. Human beings on Earth are actually doing this.
Right.
Fancy that.
But they have a plan. I think that's the biggest difference is China has a plan, Germany has a plan, we don't have a plan. And yet we have these cumulative externalities. And so the choice for us right now, and this is one thing, if we could just go around the table and talk about that, the choice for us right now is to figure out, what we think we can do. Getting together, watching movies like Triple Divide and The Price of Sand are a good start. There's, many we can get together in our communities and talk about these things. But anyway, here.
Well, that's a good first step. We are very disconnected from our natural world. We're disconnected from our basic needs, which are now provided by other people. And we, instead of providing them for ourselves, go to work every day to give somebody else money for them. We're very disconnected. And so connecting with our neighbors, connecting with how we clothe, feed, shelter, and provide our own energy is all part of that education process. As far as next steps, the state of New York, I'm going to point there for a second. There is a very recent study out of, it's by Mark Jacobson, predominantly out of Stanford University. And it's a plan to get New York State 100% on renewable energy by 2030. Now that's all energy, residential, industrial, transportation, the whole kit and caboodle. So New York State has a plan.
There's a plan.
Whether or not their legislators will choose to implement it is another story. But in the plan, it does outline the growth of economy and sustainable jobs, forever kind of jobs, that will make the state of New York energy independent and energy secure and job secure. So getting together, talking, educating ourselves, and then creating plans, consulting experts when we can find them.
Could I just ask, who would we contact in the state of New York to find out what that plan is? Does it have a name or a website that we can?
It was handed to me by Dr. Cynthia Walters from St. Vincent University, and I'm not sure where she got it, and I haven't looked online yet. But if you get back to me in a second, I might be able to pull that together.
The name of the guy that wrote it?
Is Mark Jacobson.
Mark Jacobson.
I could add to that. That's a really great plan. It touches on a lot of these alternative energy resources that we should be looking into promoting and trying to build. And it doesn't touch on one other alternative energy resource that would be really important for everyone, and that is methane. But it's not methane from extracting fossil fuels. It's methane that's created naturally through anaerobic digestion. These biodigesters that can take our waste, our human waste, our food waste, our yard waste, contain that and then generate methane for people's homes, to either heat or cook with, is a really powerful tool, and it's an alternative energy resource. There's a man named Jean Pan. His last name's Pain. He lived entirely off the grid simply through these biodigesters. and he was someone who's well noted in the world of permaculture, which is a community of people who are working for building a better design alternative to what we have right now, and tries to mimic the successes in nature. And if you look at a forest, for instance, we see a forest and we can see how unbelievably productive it is, how chaotic it is, but also how stable it is. And we try and mimic those positives that are out there and bring that into our community, bring that into our culture. And people like Jean Pan, who did that with biodigestion, is a great example. And I hope that, the study with Mark Jacobson, the things that he's done, will be pathways to new alternatives in the future. And as a journalist, I can say that many people are talking about this, and the people who talk about fossil fuel extraction just simply stay on that path. That's where they'd like to go in the future, is to keep drilling, drill baby drill. It's not too difficult of a philosophy to get behind, but of course our needs are a little bit more complex than that, so we need to look at other ideas.
Earth has a lot to teach us yet, doesn't she?
Yes, she does.
Always has.
Yes, I'd just like to say I'm a non-native with Native American relatives. My Native American name is Three Crows, and it's a very wonderful, powerful name, and I'm very happy to have it. It endows one with many positive traits, and I'm trying to grow into the name. There's a few things. I'm a Pennsylvanian who moved to Wisconsin. So here I am with kind of a doubly traumatized by these mining issues. Pennsylvania is a beautiful state. However, you can see many areas up in the Laurel Highlands, up in the mountains, that have succumbed to other earlier industrial processes. There's still large fields of orange grass. It's never properly topsoiled. And I'm not convinced that our current reclamation plans, they call them, will be successful. I don't want to seem preferential or prejudiced, but I don't want to see those kinds of areas in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a history of having shaft mines. We haven't had that much large-scale open mining until now. And so in many respects, it has been a pristine environment other than the agriculture. I don't know why we just can't learn from past experience. So I want to encourage everyone to find out what the alternatives are to our energy problems and to really advocate for them very, very strongly. We haven't heard from Edie in several minutes.
Edie, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm so impressed by the knowledge that you all have, and I'm so grateful to be included in this. One of the things that comes to mind to me is there's a lot of rural leadership going on these days. It's not just all about urban anymore, because so much is happening on the rural front, and I see that as a sign of strength. Also, the regional energy production idea, and we were talking about various ways of dealing with these issues, and slowing down the process is one of them. Minnesota is way ahead of Wisconsin on this and calling for moratorium on frack sand mining to look at it more. Another thing that I see positively happening in northwest Wisconsin, the Amish community is going to community meetings now, and people are speaking out in support of their rural communities. The Amish are an important part of our agricultural community here, and they bring a fair amount of tourism in too, and they're speaking to how this frack sand mining is going to destroy their communities, and they may very well have to leave because of the constant truck traffic. I mean, we're talking trucks on roads every few minutes, these huge sand trucks roaring by. And so I like very much hearing about the alternatives and the directions from all of you, and it encourages me to think that there are ways we can move this in another direction.
Thank you, Edie. Thank you so much for being here with us. So, are there any
Thank
last
you.
words? Besides, I just want to really say that the two films that we have in our area in Western Pennsylvania, we have Triple Divide and we have The Price of Sand, and you can use these films. In fact, there's other films coming out. Films are a wonderful way to get people together, have popcorn, and learn more about your neighbors and what you can do in your community. So I recommend these two films highly. And if you get in touch with the Thomas Merton Center, we can give you information on how to access them and how maybe to talk to Melissa and to Joshua about your community. So thank you.
Thanks, Wanda. I would just add that I think that, again, coming back to, we have to know what we have so we know that it's worth saving, right? So I always encourage people just to get outside, and whether it's walking next door to talk to their neighbor or visiting the stream that's, down the road. Our film Triple Divide is named for a very unique and special place in Pennsylvania, actually in North America. It's a triple continental divide, of which there are only 4 of its kind in North America. And it basically just means it's where 2 mountain ridges or continental divides come together, and water that falls there flows to 3 separate sides of the continent. So downstream for a triple continental divide is huge. And yet, growing up near the Triple Divide in Potter County, Pennsylvania, that's where I'm from, we didn't learn about that in our school, even though it was in our backyard. So we have to know what we have. We have to get outside and get together and watch and educate ourselves, right?
Melissa, I've just learned over the past few days from communicating with you that the Triple Divide is extremely important. In fact, the frack gas drilling that's being done in Pennsylvania could contaminate the water all the way down to Virginia. 15 million people will suffer from this. We will truly, as a Guatemalan Maya priest once said, have to purchase our water.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah, thank you, Wanda, for having us and being able to talk about this. It was a very interesting and great discussion, and I appreciate that Edie brought up the rural landowners. There is a strong movement of rural leadership across the country right now. There's one called the Transition Network, which is really positive.
Yes.
There's the CSAs, getting behind and supporting your local farmers through CSAs. And it's really changing the landscape. But of course, we do have to remember that with these CSAs and with these rural leaders, they also have to worry about finances, and some of them have had to sign leases with natural gas companies in Pennsylvania. So being aware of what those leases mean through watching films like Triple Divide or watching The Price of Sand is really important, so that if your farmer may not know about this, then you can talk to them and maybe have them restructure their contract if they want to sign again, or try and buffer themselves from any harms that might come to them or to your community through these issues and these impacts of natural gas extraction.
Yeah, Mountain Watershed Association has a really great landowners toolkit, and we have a really great list of questions for people who find themselves in a position where leasing would be the best interest. And they might be surrounded by farms that are already leased, for example. You can go to Mountain Watershed's website, which is mtwatershed.com, and get some of those resources. So.
Could I just thank Wanda and Melissa, Josh, and Edie as well? And I'd like to mention some of the organizations that are working so hard to try to turn things to the right course in Wisconsin. There would be, my organization is CultureWorks. It can be found at cultureworks.wi@gmail.com. We're working specifically to preserve the effigy mounds of the Lower Wisconsin Riverway. Edie Ehlert has a Crawford Stewardship Project, and Edie, why don't you tell us how to contact that organization?
We have a website, CrawfordStewardshipProject.org, and on that site there's a number of links as well. There are numerous groups in the Midwest working on this, numerous groups, citizen groups, and I highly recommend people go to them. And smaller groups have been taking off. Bridgeport Concerned Citizens. There's a group in Iowa, Alameda County Protectors, that put out a film, Frack Sand Land, that is worth taking a look at as well.
Well, I'm hoping that we will have, at the end of this film, we will have a list of all of the various organizations. So, get your pencils out and paper and start writing. And thank you so much for joining us today.
This land is your land, and this land is my land. From the California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. As I went a-walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway, saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. I roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts. All around me a voice was sounding, this land was made for you and me. When the sun comes shining, then I was strolling in the wheat fields waving and the dust clouds rolling. The voice was chanting as the fog was lifting, this land was made for you and me. This land is your land, and this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. When the sun comes shining, then I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving, the dust clouds rolling, the voice coming chanting, and the fog was lifting. This land was made for you and me.